Welcome back to Moby Dick. Today's segment is going to go through chapters 6 up until chapter 14, and that's going to get us from the town of New Bedford onto the island of Nantucket. So we are leaving civilization and we are heading out towards the sea. We're not there yet, though. Now, today I want to talk a little bit about a modernist reading of the text. And I know that modernism is pretty much out of favor or out of vogue in today's academic circles. People like to be postmodern or post-postmodern or deconstructionist or, whatever. What they all fail to acknowledge is that without a modernist reading of the text first, you don't get to any of the deconstruction or the postmodern or the cultural jazz that is so popular now. You can't be anti-establishment without an establishment. And at least from my reading of the beginning chapters here, I think that something that Moby Dick is trying to do is set up a discussion about what it is to be anti-establishment. So we're going to talk a little bit about a nice Hegelian dichotomy, a thesis and antithesis, and the resulting synthesis or attempt at synthesis. And we're going to talk about the romantic themes of savage versus civilization. So that's what we're heading with today. We start out in the setting with going to a chapel in New Bedford and listening to a sermon. And then from there we go back to the inn and we witness a different kind of service. We witness a worship of Kikig's idol, and then from there we get onto a little packet that takes us out to Nantucket. It's always important to look at setting because setting will walk you through visually some of the themes that the text is trying to discuss. So back to our thesis antithesis here and the savage versus civilization. In Romantic literature, there was a notion of getting back to nature, that if you go back away from civilization, you will find in the wild and in the savage a kind of pure understanding of God and man and an inherent justice in the world that we have somehow lost as we've gotten more and more civilized and smarter and smarter. Melville is certainly playing with that theme, but I think that he's questioning it more. And we see that in the locations of the chapel and in Ishmael's outright questioning of why things are the way they are in this chapel. And then as Ishmael goes back to the inn, the Spouter Inn, and questions why things are the way with Kikig and his worship of his own idol. And eventually, as Ishmael agrees to worship the idol with Kikig, it's not as simple as, oh, the savage is pure and Ishmael isn't. Ishmael is trying to figure out what savage is and what civilized is. As we get out to sea, the Christian trappings that Ishmael has grown up with become fuzzier. And we see him trying to synthesize his traditions with Kikig's. So we're still early on in the text. We aren't really going to know what Ishmael or Melville is trying to do with these themes probably until we get to the end. And I don't know what to anticipate. I don't know if Moby Dick comes to a verdict on these themes, if Moby Dick is going to say, oh yes, the savage is civilized and civilization is savage. I don't know if it's going to be that simple. Probably not. Otherwise, it'd be an easy book to read and people wouldn't complain about it as much. So right now in these early stages, the best thing to do is keep the themes in mind and make note of quotes in the text that can specifically indicate a question or a concept or an idea, one way or the other. So for the rest of today's passage, we're going to go through and highlight some of the quotes that I think are going to come back and prove very useful to us. Chapter 6 is called The Street, and in this chapter we walk out of the inn and we go down and look around at New Bedford and the people who are in New Bedford, and then we go into the chapel. Chapter 7 is the chapel, and Ishmael walks in and he observes a whole bunch of marble plaques on walls that are in the memory of sailors who have been lost at sea. And he talks about the comfort or the consolation of knowing where someone is buried as opposed to them simply being lost at sea. And, these plaques are supposed to provide comfort for the people on land who did not get to go through the ceremony of burying somebody and do not have something tangible in that sense that they can touch to mark their grief. The quotes that I want to point out today from chapter 7, they're on page 42 of the text. And again, I've got the Penguin Books text. I think that this text mirrors the original publication of it from 1851. Also, if you go to the website powermobydick.com, you can find it online. So, chapter 7, page 42. How is it that we still refuse to be comforted for those who we nevertheless maintain are dwelling in unspeakable bliss, while the living strive to hush all the dead? Wherefore but the rumor of a knocking in a tomb will terrify a whole city. All these things are not without their meanings. But faith, like a jackal, feeds among the tombs, and even from these dead doubts she gathers her most vital hope. A little bit farther down. Yes, there is death in this business of wailing, a speechlessly quick, chaotic bundling of a man into eternity. But what then? Methinks we have hugely mistaken this matter of life and death. Methinks that what they call my shadow here on earth is my true substance. Methinks that in looking at things spiritual, we are too much like oysters observing the sun through the water, and thinking that thick water the thinnest of air. Methinks my body is but the lees of my better being. In fact, take my body who will. Take it, I say. It is not me. And therefore 3 cheers for Nantucket, and come a stove boat and a stove body when they will, for stave my soul Job himself cannot. So we haven't gotten to the pulpit yet. We haven't even, we're inside the chapel, but we haven't seen the minister. And right in the beginning, Ishmael puts forth a question of what is real? Where do we really live? Do we live in this world? In which case it matters where we've been buried or how we die. Or is this world but an image or a shadow on a cave wall of what is to come? So he's putting the essence of man, the essence of who we are, out into this, you could call it a borderland, of where we should think civilization is, where we should think life is. And then we come into chapter 8, which is the pulpit. Now, the pulpit's very interesting. On page 44, you see a description of it. Usually a pulpit is in front of a congregation and a little bit raised so that people can see and hear better. But this pulpit is actually built up high, much like a watchtower in a ship. And it's only accessible by climbing a rope ladder like on a ship. The minister will come in and he will climb up this ladder and then he will close it up behind him, therefore segregating himself from this congregation. And he's on land and he's in a church, but it's reconstructing the space of a ship. So on page 44, Ishmael's looking at the minister, Father Mabel, as he comes into the chapel and up on the pulpit. And he says, I pondered some time without fully comprehending the reason for this. Father Maple enjoyed such a wide reputation for sincerity and sanctity that I could not suspect him of courting notoriety by any mere tricks of the stage. No, thought I, there must be some sober reason for this thing. Furthermore, it must symbolize something unseen. Can it be, then, that by that act of physical isolation he signifies his spiritual withdrawal for the time from all outward worldly ties and connections? Yes, for the replenished with the meat and the wine of the word to the faithful man of God, this pulpit, I see, is a self-containing stronghold. Okay, so we've got some help here. Ishmael himself is explaining to us that the ship on the sea will be, a form of transport to what goes beyond this, civilized land and the savage sea. And maybe as long as you're on a ship, you're in a purer form of civilization. The minister is supposed to lead the people. In fact, on page 45, there's a quote, "For the pulpit is ever this earth's foremost part. All the rest comes in its rear. The pulpit leads the world." Yes, the world's a ship on its passage out, and not a voyage complete, and the pulpit is its prow. Okay, so if we're on a ship, then we've left the questionable civilization of land. We aren't in the actual wild of the sea with the whale itself, but perhaps in our microcosm of the ship, we are in a purer civilization on our way to God or to our real self. Don't know. Okay, so we get into the sermon in chapter 9, and as expected, it's a sermon about Jonah and the whale. I imagine there are people who have written an entire thesis project on this chapter. I'm not going to. I'm not trying to do a scholarly reading here. I'm trying just to read it and think my way through it. So we're going to just go over. We're going to go through and skip talking about the sermon. I recommend, if you're interested, looking it up online. We're going to go to chapter 10. Now, after chapter 9, the minister finishes his sermon. And on page 54, the end of the chapter, it says, "He said no more, but slowly waving a benediction, covered his face with his hands, and so remained, kneeling, till all the people had departed, and he was left alone in the place." We leave, and in chapter 10, we return back to the inn. Kikig has left. He left during the sermon. And he went back to the inn, and Ishmael finds him holding his little idol and working at it. And let's see. Ishmael is struck by the purity of Kikig, not the beauty, but the unaffected honesty of him. And he's observing his friend, really thinking about his idol. I mean, it looks like Kikig is trying to make sense of how this little wooden idol will fit into what the minister in the church was talking about. So we go to page 57, and it says, "As I sat there in that now lonely room, the fire burning low, in that mild stage when after its first intensity has warmed the air, it then only glows to be looked at, the evening shades and phantoms gathering round the casements and peering in upon us silent, solarly twain, the storm booming without in the solemn swells, I began to be sensible of strange feelings. I felt a melting in me. No more my splintered heart and maddened hand were turned against the wolfish world. This soothing savage had redeemed it. There he sat, his very indifference speaking a nature in which there lurked no civilized hypocrisies and bland deceits. Wild he was, a very sight of sights to see. Yet I began to feel myself mysteriously drawn towards him. and those same things that would have repelled most others, they were the very magnets that thus drew me. I'll try a pagan friend, thought I, since Christian kindness has proved but hollow courtesy. So Ishmael sits down next to Kikig, and Kikig invites him to worship this idol with him. And this is on page 58. Ishmael says, I was a good Christian, born and bred in the bosom of the infallible Presbyterian Church. How then could I unite with this wild idolater in worshipping his piece of wood? But what is worship, thought I? Do you suppose now, Ishmael, that the magnanimous God of heaven and earth, pagans and all included, can possibly be jealous of an insignificant bit of black wood? Impossible. But what is worship? To do the will of God. That is worship. And what is the will of God? To do to my fellow man what I would have my fellow man do to me. That is the will of God. Now, Kikig is my fellow man. And what do I wish that this Kikig would do to me? Why, unite with me in my particular Presbyterian form of worship. Consequently, I must then unite with him. Ergo, I must turn idolater. So I kindled the shavings, helped prop up the innocent little idol, offered him burnt biscuit with Kikig, salaamed before him twice or thrice, kissed his nose, and that done we undressed and went to bed, at peace with our own consciousness and all the world. How it is I know not, but there is no place like a bed for confidential disclosures between friends. So in this last bit here, in chapter 10, Ishmael and Kikig go to bed for the night. Man and wife, they say, there open the very bottom of their souls to each other, and some old couples often lie and chat over old times till nearly morning. Thus then in our heart's honeymoon lay I and Kikig, a cozy, loving pair. So Ishmael has married himself now to the savage. And he has done this through the use of reason, which is, the very civilized notion. He reasons his way into worshiping with Kikig, and then they marry. And then the next day they get up and they go to Nantucket. So, unlike other romanticized fiction, Ishmael does not throw off the trappings of his civilized self and, run into the wild and become savage. What he does is he uses civilized reason and logic, although perhaps somewhat misinformed, to justify his unity with the savage, but also to make the savage civilized. So he's not trying to abandon one or the other, he's trying to merge the two.